Dr. Atchison here, and we're talking about Chapter 12, Self and Identity. This is our first video lecture where we're talking about the sense of self. So the sense of self just starts to develop in infancy, and this is really where we're starting to get our self-knowledge, self-awareness, aware that we are separate beings than someone else. In infancy, this occurs through a number of different mechanisms, one of which is kind of the perceptual processes, kind of understanding that their perception can be different, gaining control of those body movements, that they are able to control their arms, that they are able to control their legs. And increasingly, they start to use themselves as an anchor point when searching for an object. So in those search tasks that we talked about in Chapter 8, they'll increasingly start to use that themselves in that process. And they'll start to understand personal agency and the fact that different people can have different desires and can have different actions. And we talked about some of this in the cognition chapter already. So identification of self is recognizing that you are a physically unique being. So this includes things like recognizing yourself in the mirror. This includes all kinds of different things. And we see that visual self-recognition, that where you can really see that yourself, that infant can see that they are different than someone else, that they can recognize themselves in a mirror, that they can discriminate themselves from someone else, from photographs per se. We'll see that one of the ways that we do this is with recognizing mirror images. And you'll see that there's a video that I provided for you to watch called the Rouge Test, where what they do is they put either lipstick or rouge or blush on the child's nose, and then they're shown a mirror. And young children, typically before 15 months, sometimes 15 to 24 months can do this as well. They'll look at the red on the baby's nose and they'll go look for the baby. They'll think that this is a unique baby. This is not them. It's not till about 24 months of age that they really recognize in this Rouge test, oh, that's me. And then what they'll do is they'll reach up and they'll wipe the red off their nose. So make sure you watch that video, Rouge Test. Another example of this, of understanding that that they can discriminate themselves and their actions from others, is the shopping cart study. Children are given a shopping cart to pull, but they can't because there's a rug attached to it and they're standing on the rug. And young children who don't really have this self-awareness don't notice that they're the one keeping the shopping cart from moving. And so this is another way that we can test self-awareness within infancy, to kind of see which children have it and how it manifests itself. So both of those videos are required and are provided for you on D2L. We don't really see that these firm connections between the physical self and the existence of what we feel as ourselves really isn't fully established until about 4. You can see this evidence in the scale error video from Judy DeLoach's lab. Remember, Judy DeLoach was the one that had the shrinking room, and she had, Terry's room would shrink down and would have the big troll, and then we all of a sudden have the mini troll with the shrinking room. Well, in looking at these issues of scale, they found that children don't always understand themselves in terms of their physicality, even at 2.5, in terms of scales of other things. They'll notice that the size of something has changed, but they don't understand how that relates to their physical body and how they can use that thing. So all 3 of those videos are required and really demonstrate this kind of progression of self-awareness. And as this self-awareness really strengthens, then we can get into self-concept. So you can't have a concept of yourself, of who you think you are, until you know that yourself is discrete and different from everyone else. And so again, as we get this strengthening of self-awareness through the things we discussed in the videos that you'll watch, we see that self-concept develops. And self-concept is really that set of attributes, abilities, and attitudes and values that we personally believe identify who we are, right? So if I asked you who you are, you'll give me a set of these things, of attributes, abilities, and attitudes, values. People will put in sometimes adults and teenagers will sometimes put in things like religious affiliations, political affiliations, other kinds of attitudes, abilities, beliefs, and these are used as defining characteristics. Now at 2, what we use to define our characteristics are very different. They can start to identify themselves by their gender, and they can start to describe themselves as a kid, a child, and to notice that is different, that there's a difference in age. They'll start by doing concrete descriptions of physical features. A lot of times kids will focus on what they have, and that is an identifying feature. Preferences, things that they like. They also tend to focus on the here and now. Okay, so they tend to focus on these more physical things, things that they can concretely see and interact with. And they're not going to be like a lot of the self-concept ideas that you'll have as an adult and as a teenager, which tend to be more abstract. They're going to be like, I like dinosaurs, and that's who I am. Do you got a problem with it? Joking about that last part. Their descriptions are really unrealistically positive. So, I'm the best bike rider in the entire world. These kinds of things. And that's fine, and that's good, and that's a typical developmental process in this self-concept. And the question, how they answer these questions are really dependent on how they're asked. So you can get different answers depending on how you frame the question, which is, again, indicative that children don't really have a very firm concept of themselves very, very early on. That it is more based on the here and now, on that focus of the present. And so how that question is framed can influence how the child identifies themselves. As children age and as children grow, their self-concept becomes more balanced and less all or none descriptions. They start to use social comparisons, and they'll make judgments about their appearance and their abilities, and they'll make those judgments in relation to others. Okay, so maybe I'm smarter than, or I'm better at spelling than anyone in my class. So that would be a social comparison. They can still concretely measure. They got the top grade on the spelling test, and they consistently do that. So that's a kind of a self-concept. I'm really good at spelling. I'm better than anyone in my class. Comparing it to others, again, it's more balanced. They're no longer saying, I'm the best in the entire world. They're, again, kind of toning these down and putting them more in context. They also start to notice the difference between the ideal self and the real self, that there's differences between who we want to be or who we think we're supposed to be versus who we actually are. And this can be a problem if it's the who we think we're supposed to be versus who we really think we are. We'll talk about this some when we get to the gender and sexuality chapter as well. But when children are internalizing expectations, and using other people's opinions to have opinions on what they should be and who they should be, that can really undermine self-esteem. And we'll talk about self-esteem in the next video lecture. But again, we see that this disparity between who they feel that they are and who that they think they should be can again cause big problems, can cause problems in self-esteem, and can cause problems in psychological well-being. Again, they'll start to reference social groups as they start to grow up. So I'm a Boy Scout. Their membership in that social group. I go to this karate. I go to this religious organization. Using these kinds of reference of social groups as a marker of self-concept. And you can see that this is approaching kind of where we can end up, where we have these more abstract concepts of self, but they start out in the concrete. I know that I'm this because I'm a part of this group. So that social comparison allows them to start to kind of reach out into some more of these abstract ideas, these abstract concepts. There's also variations in cultures, depending on, again, kind of what's culturally prevalent and what the child is being exposed to. So again, this is where it's going to be can have a big nurture effect. This is not going to be nature based in terms of this. So we'll see that kids in the United States and other Western cultures tend to have more personal preferences and skills and opinions. So I'm smart. I like to play soccer. I like the color pink. There are more questions about the individual, which is very indicative of the individualistic culture that most Western cultures are. So again, if you think of the difference between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures, we're talking about the me cultures versus the we cultures. And typically the United States is that individualistic culture, that me. And so you'll see that children will make more references about their self-concept in respect to themselves. Whereas children in collectivist cultures, which China is one of them, will tend to reference more social interactions with others, more group memberships, things that really focus on that we part, right? That collectivist part. I'm in second grade. My friends like me. So in the United States, it might be I'm nice. That's a reference to me. Where in China, my friends like me. A reference to how my friends feel. And so again, these cultural variations frame this concept kind of who we are. And think back to Brofenbrenner. This is really very much in line with his model, where we have this greater system that can then affect the child tangentially. And this is one of the ways that that's happening. So let's watch a quick video on self-concept.
Children show changes in their self-concepts with age. Preschool children like Todd and Christopher are likely to describe themselves in terms of physical characteristics, possessions, and behaviors.
I play in the dirt and I put cement and I make a building. My room has dinosaurs in it, the dinosaur room. Mine is a dinosaur room, and my mom's is a girl room, and my dad's is in the middle, and mine's on the left side, and my mom's on the right side. And I have a dog, cat, fish, hermit crabs, and some couches, 2 couches, and a big TV, and some toys that get lost behind the TV.
In middle childhood, children begin to describe themselves in less concrete terms. Like Rachel, Stephanie, and Ricardo, they may describe themselves in terms of group membership.
I'm 9, go to the Marlboro Intermediate School. My favorite color is purple. I'm in 2nd grade, and I have one brother, and I like to go swimming. I'm in the 4th grade. I'm 9 years old, and I go to the Weston House.
In middle childhood, children also begin to describe themselves along more psychological dimensions, as illustrated by 7-year-old Joseph and 8-year-old Jenny.
Can you tell me 3 things about yourself?
I like school a lot.
Very good.
And I love art, and I like helping people. Nice, smart, creative.
So you could see that those young children were talking about the things that they had. There was the one boy who was talking about his TV and his couches and his toys that get lost behind his TV. He's talking about those physical features, those possessions, things that are more here and now, less abstract things, very concrete things. Whereas the older children are talking about things that are a little bit more abstract, smart, creative, things like that aren't as easy to nail down, that aren't a physical thing. So you can see that adaptations, those changes in self-concept across development. So again, in middle childhood, they're going to be more likely to refer to emotions. A lot of times they can combine several attributes into one, and that's a more complex idea, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on one of the subsequent slides. And their accuracy of their statements really improve. So they're not so much focused on like the one little boy that was talking about his mom's room is a girl's room and his dad's room's in the middle. Somehow none of that made any sense. So again, their accuracy will improve as their cognition allows them to have these more abstract ideas, to kind of have these more complex ideas, and to really have better information processing skills for the accuracy of those ideas too. In late childhood, we're going to see a lot more of those social comparison to peers and discuss opposing attributes so that you can be kind of nice in one situation and not in another. Kind of that these things that you can be a medley of complex, that it's not all or none. It can be a gradient depending on the situation. We also start to see more negative self-evaluations, and we'll start to see more lower self-worth, which again, we'll talk about more in our self-esteem lecture. By the time we get to adolescence, we're really getting a lot more abstract and hypothetical in the ways that one describes themselves. This is where we're going to be focused on attitudes. Attitudes isn't concrete. Personal attributes, beliefs about hypothetical situations, all of these are going to be, again, indicative of that cognitive processing. One of the reasons we didn't talk about sense of self was until after cognition was because a lot of it is contingent on what the child is cognitively able to do. And so as children and adolescents are able to engage in more abstract and engage in more hypothetical thinking, we're going to see that that's going to be indicative of their self-concept as well. So their self-concept will become more abstract and be able to have attributes and beliefs based on these hypothetical situations. So again, we talk about these chapters as they're completely discrete, but of course, there's a lot of overlap here. Really, we'll see that children can start to unify separate traits into larger ones, more abstract ones as they age, again, as a function of cognition. So you can take smart and talented and combine that together to be intelligent. That's even less concrete than the other two. So we get more abstract, more kind of umbrella kinds of things. We can describe themselves in contradictory traits in different social settings. So I'm shy if I'm in a new situation, but when I'm around my friends, I can be really outgoing and really talkative. So noticing that contradiction within themselves, depending on different social situations. And they'll gradually combine these into really this more organized system. They'll start adding qualifiers to these traits. So I might have a temper. Ignore that extra T in there. But it's fairly quick. So they're qualifying that. It's not like a gradual thing that you don't build up and then all of a sudden the person gets angry. Like they realize that they're quickly can get angry. And integrating these principles. Again, I'm talkative when I'm around my friends, taking these contexts and incorporating that into this. Again, this is very indicative of the development of of cognition, but also the development of emotions. And both of these things are going to be important features in identifying self-concept. So this ends our first lecture on sense of self. Thanks.